I'm going to install some actuator cable for this Patriot arm, which is going to be installed on the opposite side of the control housing. So this will allow us to extend this actuator cable and run it across the drive. So you could do it a couple different ways. You can cut it off right here and then make a splice. It's not uncommon to do that, and sometimes you have to. In this particular case, I'm just going to go ahead and void the factory warranty and run the actuator cable that's going to go across the drive into the housing and make all my connections in there. That way I don't have to worry about a splice point, and then all the connections are inside the weatherproof housing, and it's going to give us a better connection, if you will, if we do it in here to the factory connectors. And that's it. So this will take about 30 minutes, and I'll go ahead and start that right now. And the first thing you do is cut the actuator cable off, take these 5 bolts out, and then disconnect all the factory cables, factory connections from this cable, and then put new cable on there. And that's what it looks like after the 5 bolts have been loosened. I can't see anything because of the way the damn sun is. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So I just used an impact wrench on the lowest setting and backed them off with a 5/16 nut. And then now what you can do is just take your screwdriver, and then you can just put it in the back of the housing and then just break the seal just by putting a little bit of pressure on it, and that'll break that seal. Now we're lucky here because it got a pretty clean break across it, so we don't have to replace the seal. And then now we'll just make our new connections in there. And on these, I wog it. Wog, white, orange, green, wog it. So if you forget, that's the order that it goes in, white, orange, green. And we'll make new spade solderless terminal connectors there, and then we'll make new connections here for the motor. Okay, I took the heat shrink off of the positive, the hot wire going to the motor from the control board, and this is the part that's going away, and this is what we're staying. That's what's staying. Here's the step that I did. What I did is I took a razor blade and just cut it back, and then once I got it back to there, I took the side cutters and then just cut all the way along up there, and then take it out, and then I'll hold on to this part of the cable, this cable right here, because that'll tell me how long these are. Once I'm making the new putting this part of the actuator cable on there. Once I'm putting this on there, I can feed my insulation all the way up to here, and then I'll know how far the wires have to be sticking out in order for me to make a good solid connection here. It's going to be kind of tough to see, but this is the wire that actually came off of the actuator arm. Now it's going to be really tough to see, but on that red wire right there, you can see right there's a little nick, right? And where that nick came from is when I was scoring the jacket in order to strip it back so I could expose the wires, a little nick happened. So you got to be aware that that's going to happen when you're doing your wire and you're cut back the jacket to expose the wire. So what you do is you cut it back this far, and then you make a little niche right there, and then you strip the wire back from there without actually cutting. That way you get past all these little nicks, because you don't want any of those little nicks in the insulation of the wire itself. And it will start to oxidize, possibly corrode, depending upon what's in the air, and add resistance to the wire. And that's one of the 3 faults in a wire: short to ground, high resistance, or an open. and you don't want any of those, and you definitely don't want to start it off bad by actually nicking the wire. And then here's the one that I just stripped back, and you can see that what is that? The green one is nicked, the green one is nicked, the black one nicked. They're all nicked because I was not worried about that. I'm just going to pull the jacket back from there by stripping it back with some snips, or just physically just pulling the cables apart and get past this, and then I'll cut this off and have good wire. But now you can see why I saved this wire right here, that wire right there, is because now I can get my distance once I get good cable and see how long my wires need to be. So you can see I've got the wires cut to length using the old cable as a gauge. I just put it right next to it and just started cutting them off at the same lengths that they were, with the exception of I staggered white, orange, and green, making white the longest, then orange, then green. And here's the stages of termination. So white has had the insulation stripped back and a solderless terminal connector crimped to it, and then orange has just been stripped back, and then green has the insulation still on it. So this is what it looked like. Then it goes to this stage right here, just being stripped back, and then we actually put a connector on it, and then we'll make the connection there on top of the board. But we'll do green first and work our way up, and then we'll worry about the power connectors for that run voltage to the motor. Worry about those in a second. So I've got the white, orange, green tied in, and then I've got my power to the motor tied in. I had to use these connectors. I cut the factory connectors off, and then I had to put these other connectors on because I didn't have a size that would match. So this looks like it's weird because it's got two females going together. Well, actually this female actually has a female and a male on it, so I bent the male up to plug into this other female. You may have seen them before. So you can see that I used some heat shrink to make that connection a little bit more rigid and not as susceptible to bend and break. I'll zip tie it as well too, but gives you a little bit better idea what it looks like when it's all done. And that connector that I used was like this, but it was obviously for a different gauge. So I just bent this little tab up right there, and then as you can see, there's plenty of, it takes some effort to bend it, but you can see that it's one solid piece, so it'll be plenty rigid for this. Especially what I'm going to do is I'll recess the red wire, red and yellow, which are common and positive. I'll recess those in there, and then I'll just zip tie these together. So I'll show you how that looks here in a second. So that's what it looks like when it's all zip tied and ready to go. And you can see I got my white, orange, green. I'm just confirming that I got it right. From the top to the bottom, white, orange, green, I call wog it. And then I've got the cable zip tied in there. And then I've got the motor wires recessed back in there. So that should be a pretty good install. None of my wires are tied in there. And I did catch that the green actually was not pushed in all the way. And you got to be careful of that when you have this insulation on these connectors. You can actually plug the male counterpart of this in between the top and the insulation of the jacket that goes around it, and you want to be in the top and this bottom part right here. And if you plug it in there, you'll still get an electrical connection, but it's likely that if it has any stress on it, it could come off. So you just got to be cautious doing that. I just did that and was lucky that I caught it. I thought I had everything on there just right, and I just, out of luck, I caught it. So anyways, just make sure you're not plugging the male in between here and there. Plug it in between here and here. All right. So I can't get any happier than that. Now I'll mount this back together. The gasket's still good. There's a little tear right there, but the gasket's still good. And I'll plug this back in. Now the one thing that you want to be cautious when you are plugging this back in is that when you're screwing these back into this cast frame, one, you don't break the bolts, and two, you don't strip it. So just do it by hand until you get it in there a little bit, and then you can tighten them down, and you can use a gun to tighten it in. Just make sure it's on the lowest setting possible, speed wise and tension wise. And then the second thing is the best thing is just use a 5/16 nut driver and just be done with it. I use a gun, so that's what it looks like put back together. I spun them in there with my drill and then hand tightened them, and we're good to go. And as you can see, that looks like it is from the factory, with the exception of now it has 25 foot of actuator cable going to it. Hopefully that'll be enough.